Well, the world is now marveling at the story of a 56-year-old woman from British Columbia who survived for 7 weeks with very little food and water. Rita Chretien and her husband Al were on a road trip to Nevada when their van got stuck in mud. There was no cell phone service, so he went for help. Rita Chretien stayed put, and that played a key role in her survival. My colleague Lynn Desjardins joins me now with more on this story. Hello, Lynn.
Hi, Mark.
Now, this is, it's an amazing story how this woman was able to make it through 7 weeks out in the wilderness.
It really is, Mark. Rita Chretien had only a very small amount of trail mix, some hard candy, and fish oil pills. And what she did, she rationed these and eventually ran out of them. And she also drank from melted snow and also water from a nearby gully. It's almost incredible that she survived this long, although when people stumbled across her van, she apparently thought that she could have only lived for a few more days.
Well, of course, what everyone is wondering is exactly how did she manage this? I mean, surviving 49 days with just about nothing to eat and little water.
Yeah, I spoke with a survival instructor who says it really was a miracle. Whether through knowledge or just by instinct, Rita Chretien did everything right. She stayed put, she drank water, she conserved her energy, which meant that she burned fewer calories, and that may have extended her survival time by a few weeks. Paul Tarsitano is a paramedic and a wilderness emergency medical technician in Toronto.
How do we keep alive if you're lost in the wilderness? Generally, you may survive 3 or 4 minutes without oxygen, 3 or 4 hours in a blizzard if you're not dressed properly, maybe 3 or 4 days without water, and 3 or 4 weeks without food. So if we look at this, she survived 49 days with minimal amount of calories, but what kept her going that she stayed with her car, her shelter, and she was hydrating, drinking water. She remained calm by reading and journaling, and that in turn added to her survival, most definitely.
Paul Tarsitano says probably the most important thing Rita Chretien did was to stay with the van. It's cold and wet in the Nevada backcountry at this time of year, and that can kill very quickly.
If she wasn't in that car or without that shelter, the number one thing that kills us in that type of environment where she was is exposure or hypothermia, the lowering of the body temperature. That's what's going to get you. So she did have a shelter. Every degree your brain starts to cool, you lose 7% of brain function, resulting in poor judgment. Also, if she's not drinking any water, she's going to become dehydrated. In turn, her blood pressure starts to drop, again causing some form of confusion as well as headaches. If she's not drinking water within a couple of days, the danger of kidney failure can happen.
So right there, it was critical that Rita Chretien continued to drink water. She was eventually discovered, as we know, by 3 people on all-terrain vehicles out hunting for antlers. They found the van draped in blankets and with a sign on it which read, "Stuck." Mrs. Chretien opened the van door, and when she was asked if everything was okay, she said, No, I am not okay. I need help. She was weak and could not stand very well. But she was able to tell them how she rationed her food by having just 1 spoonful of trail mix per day until she ran out. And of course, as we know, she drank melted snow, water from a nearby creek, and when she got too weak to go out and get that, she just drank from the gully, which was under the van where it got stuck.
Well, talk to me about her chances of survival compared with, say, that of her husband, who hasn't been found yet.
Well, as we go to air, no, he's not been found. And I guess the most important point is that Mrs. Chretien did stay with the van and he did not. And Paul Tarsitano says, in general, women have a better chance of survival in the wilderness than do men.
She had the advantage of being a female. Women do much better in long-term survival than men. 2 reasons. They have generally more fat than men, generally speaking. Men have leaner muscle, but the fat itself gives more calories, so they can be sustained for longer periods without food. Also, what I found over the years is attitude. Women will generally stop and think about the ordeal, where men sometimes, generally speaking, again, would act and will go forward and try to get themselves out.
Mr. Tarsitano says staying put not only sheltered Mrs. Chretien from the elements, but made it easier to find her. That, he says, is generally the case, that unless there's really an urgent need to leave the scene, something like a severe injury that needs attention, something like that, it's generally better to stay there, to stay at the scene.
All right, what about some ideas to make yourself more visible if you get lost in the woods?
Yeah, if you do find yourself stuck somewhere, Mr. Tarsitano says, well, the obvious thing is to call 911. But in this case, there was no cell phone service, so they could not call for help. But there are other things that you can do.
You could always use your car as a signaling device. For example, the horn, you could beep the horn 3 times. Anything in groups of 3 is an international distress signal. Worst case scenario, you could always pull out your spare tire and burn it, emitting very dark black smoke during the day. Your mirrors is signaling. If you have garbage bags, especially orange garbage bags, take them out, cut them so they're wide, and put them 100 feet apart. Again, anything in groups of 3 is an international distress signal for planes. You could do a few things like that.
Most important, though, Mr. Tarsitano says try to make sure to not get into this kind of situation in the first place. GPS systems can be great in the city, but they are not so good in rural areas. You can use them to find alternative routes, but they don't necessarily show you the condition of those roads. And there have been many cases of people getting lost or stuck using these devices. Maps may be old hat, but they're more likely to give you an idea of the condition of the road on which you plan to travel. Also, very important, make an itinerary, give it to someone who will check to make sure you made it back and who knows exactly where you are if you don't make it back.
What about some other advice from Mr. Tarsitano?
Yeah, he says just be prepared.
Carry some things that keep our priorities, such as something for shelter, extra wool blankets, water, some form of communication device. If you're traveling in an area where there's no cell phone coverage, why not carry something that could be utilized satellite, such as a spot, a satellite phone, or some vehicles have communication devices activated through a satellite system. And again, be mentally prepared. How do you do that? Maybe even take a course or read. And just the act of putting extra gear in the car and leaving that trip itinerary gets you the mindset, yeah, things could happen, but at least we're prepared.
The message is, if you should get lost in the wilderness, do what Rita Chretien did. Stay put, drink water, conserve your energy, stay calm. Those kinds of things that we've talked about would improve your chances of staying alive, as Mrs. Chretien did for that incredible 49 days.
Wow. All right, Lynn, thank you very much for this.
You're welcome, Mark.
And that is Lynn Desjardins here on The Link.